Hello, class. Today we're going to talk about business and critical thinking. We're going to look at advertising and we're going to look at conspiracy theories. So let's get to it. To understand some of the critical advertising tactics that people use or that advertisers use, we first have to understand some of the constraints that advertisements and advertisers face when they have to craft a persuasive message. The first constraint is called inherent similarity. Now, inherent similarity is basically the idea that a lot of products that are on the market are essentially the same. I mean, if you just look at Advil and Bayer and Tylenol and Motrin and all of these different products that cure the same thing, at the end of the day, if you're a consumer and you decide you have a headache and you need to take something and you go to the pharmacy, how do you decide between Advil, Bayer, and Tylenol and Motrin and the store brand? So what advertisers often face, because it's rare when you have a monopoly on something, you have to face the idea that your competition eventually is going to catch up with you and your products are going to be very identical. What advertisers have to figure out is, what can we do to make ourselves distinct even though we're not really all that much different? So it could be the nice packaging, it could be a slogan, it could be something that is added to the product that somehow makes it more extreme or make it a better experience. But this is one of the constraints. The idea is that a persuasive message for a product is probably going to have competitor products that are basically the same thing. So what makes your product special? You have to solve this inherent similarity problem. The second constraint has to do with false advertising laws. Now, when we're talking about false advertising, I found the legal definition here. It's the crime or tort of publishing, broadcasting, or otherwise publicly distributing an advertisement that contains an untrue, misleading, or deceptive representation or statement which was made knowingly or recklessly and with the intent to promote the sale of property, goods, or services to the public. So in other words, you can't lie in advertisements. So what advertisers have to figure out then is, okay, we have to make ourselves distinct and we have to somehow make people engaged in the product or interested in the product, but we have to do it without lying. Now, we know of some cases where, in fact, companies got caught for false advertising. If those of you remember the clean diesel lawsuit that was filed against Volkswagen, it turned out that their diesel emissions that they said were clean were not actually clean at all, and in some ways worse for the environment. Or some of you might remember the Subway footlong scandal, where actually the sandwiches that were being produced were not actually a foot long, and thus were caught for false advertising. So you already have a product that's very similar to all the other products, and somehow you have to make it different, but you have to make sure you don't break the law either, because that's a class action lawsuit. The third constraint deals with cluttered advertising space. Not only do you have a product and that you're going to have competitor products that are very identical, in the space that you actually advertise, there's going to be a ton of other people giving advertisements too. Sometimes in direct competition to your product, sometimes not in direct competition. But what this also deals with, this cluttered advertising space, it deals with the limited human attention span. As an advertiser, nobody's going to watch a half-hour long advertisement. The only time people do is at 1 o'clock in the morning when the infomercials are on and you may not be in a normal state of mind anyways. So cluttered advertising space is not just there's a lot of advertisements out there. It's also that we have limited attention span, limited human attention span. So some people have argued, for example, that social media actually operates on the attention economy, where it's all about vying for attention more than it's vying for your dollar. Because when you give your attention, that's how they make their money. So something interesting to think about. You have a lot of competitors, not only products, but competitor advertisers, who may compete with your products or who may just compete with your attention. The last is audience expectations. So when you're an advertiser, you have to take a product that's very similar to very many other products. You have to somehow not violate the law, and you have to somehow get your message out in a space where there's going to be a ton of other advertisements and people are very limited attention. And what you have to do is somehow target your market. Because here's the idea. When you're an advertiser, you target a particular audience demographic. There's very few things that can appeal to everybody. So when you craft an advertisement, you're generally targeting a specific demographic or group of people. And when you target the people, you have to do things that can get their attention, but at the same time not also hurt their expectations or violate them in a negative way. So you have to find a way to get people's attention without turning them off, but at the same time not being so conservative that you never grab their attention in the first place. So this is where these gimmicks come in. This is where celebrity endorsements come into play. Interesting songs, interesting logos, all of those things try to help get our attention. So if you're an advertiser, these are the things that you have to deal with. You have to deal with these 4 factors, and you have to somehow craft a message that's going to get people interested in your product. Now, what we're going to do next is look at some common advertising tactics. Now, I'm only going to go over 5, but there's dozens of different advertising tactics that we could talk about. And by showing you these tactics, you can learn to kind of decode what an advertisement is doing and to make sure that you don't fall slave or fall for a scam or, false advertising or anything like that. So let's take a look. One of the first ways that products try to advertise or advertisers try to advertise is by giving the product a certain semantic title. And what we mean is it's given a name that doesn't really have a clearly defined meaning, but you make it what you think it is, and then it makes you want to buy it. So take the examples of like all natural food or health food or environmental friendly or organic. The problem with these kinds of labels is that they're not very clearly defined. What makes an item natural? Is it just that it's found in nature? Well, then technically everything is found in nature to some degree. I mean, plants, chemicals are found in nature. So it's not really clear what's natural. Is urine natural? Are mushrooms natural? What about cows that have been raised in a factory farm? Is that natural? So there isn't really a clear definition of what natural is, but because we think natural means like, I guess it doesn't have preservatives or something like that, that somehow it gives it special merit. But the problem is there's not a clear definition legally as to what counts as natural or what legally counts as health food. It's just kind of what the advertisers say what it is and what you do on your end to make it meaningful to you. So semantic titles are generally these things, these names that we give that are actually meaningless or don't have a very clear definition, but we kind of complete the definition on our own end as consumers, and then we feel good about buying it. So don't fall for these empty semantic titles that don't have a legal definition. Another advertising tactic is weasel words. So these are words that negate or make meaningless the claim that follows. So here are some examples. Helps control dandruff symptoms with regular use. So you can see helps control doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to do it, but it's helping to some degree, and we don't really know to what degree. And with regular use, we don't really know what counts as regular. Leaves dishes virtually spotless. Why don't they just say makes dishes virtually spotless? Because they want to leave some wiggle room because, maybe it doesn't really get all the grime off, but, it leaves the dishes spotless. Okay, virtually spotless. By the way, virtually. So there's still a spot. You can't sue them because it said virtually spotless. Listerine fights bad breath. Okay, so it fights, not stops, but it fights it. Okay, so these weasel words give advertisers wiggle room to basically make a claim without being stuck to it entirely. Now, that might just be legal self-protection for the advertisers, but when you start looking at products that are quite suspicious and they're using these words, you have to wonder how much help does it provide or how effective is it? If they use words like help, it's not very helpful to somebody who wants to know these definitions. You can also look for other words: acts, comforts, refreshes, works, fortified, enriched, strengthened. What's the threshold of strengthened? Okay, is it from 1% to 2%, or is it 10% to 30%? You don't really know. You just know that somehow, to some degree, the first product is better than the other. It's been strengthened somehow. So you see how meaningless it becomes because you don't really know enough, and there's not enough information provided to really know how this works. So weasel words are how it is. Or defend against gum disease. Why don't you just stop gum disease or prevent gum disease? It's the weasel words, okay? So when you hear these words, you got to have your antennas up because they're basically giving themselves wiggle room for in case they don't actually deliver. Another advertising tactic is empty comparisons, and this is where they basically make comparative claims that you really can't compare. So an example is the most advanced spray lube you can buy, better than the leading brand. Well, what's the leading brand? They don't say. Now, they probably do that on purpose because they don't want to name the leading brand, because then they're giving the leading brand name recognition. But at the same time, it becomes meaningless because what's the leading brand? Which one is it? And then how do you know it's better? How much better? And where's the evidence for that? So it's just kind of like it's better than the leading brand, and you kind of have to fill in what the leading brand is, and there could be 2 or 3 leading brands. And you have to figure out, well, how much better is better? Is it 1% better? 5% better? So they're kind of meaningless comparisons at the end of the day. And when you hear these, take them with a grain of salt. Now, a very common one now are special ingredients. And there's 2 different ways products will do this. Either they'll add a special ingredient that's they claim is unique and somehow makes the product's performance better. So, for example, you might hear there's water plus alkaline. There's alkaline in the water. So now alkaline makes this bottled water better than your regular Dannon bottled water. Or smart water, right, has hydrolytes in it. So now supposedly it's more hydrating than your typical Dannon bottled water. So they add some kind of special ingredient and they make the argument that the ingredient makes it better than the typical other products. And they may even charge you a little more for that special ingredient, even if the ingredient doesn't really do that much. So the other way they do it is called angel dusting, where they take a normally beneficial ingredient, they add it, but when you actually study how much that ingredient makes a difference, it's not really much of a difference at all. So you see the Splenda with B vitamins. There's not enough B vitamins in it to really make a difference to give your daily intake of B vitamins, okay? But because the angel dust is in there, it suddenly makes you want to buy it. Another example that I saw, but I couldn't find it, so there's some forms of macaroni and cheese that say they have vegetables in them, but when you actually look at how much vegetable is actually in it, it's only like a quarter of a carrot. It's like even less than a quarter. It's like 10% of a regular sized carrot. So like basically 1 or 2 bites of a carrot. So not enough to really count as your vegetable intake, but because it has a serving of vegetables in there, they make it sound like it's better for you than what it actually is. The last is the water is wet claims. And basically, these are claims about a product that's actually true for any product. The example that I like is the one by Schlitz beer. So here you have an advertisement. Schlitz beer is aged for months before it's marketed, and then aged in glass and enameled steel tanks. And then every bottle is pasteurized after it's sealed. Okay. And I remember there was a thing I was reading, and they were saying that when Schlitz started advertising the beer, he said that it was cleaned with steam. Okay. Now the problem with these claims, or just kind of the limitations, I guess, is every beer does this. Okay. What Schlitz is claiming here, like the enamel steel tanks and the pasteurized after sealed, and the whole cleaning with steam, like I talked about, pretty much every beer company does that. So somebody asked him, so why are you mentioning this if it turns out that every beer company does this? Well, because the fact that we claim it, people will think it's special because we claim we do it, even though everybody does it. So it's one of those things where when a company says they do this thing, they do this very special thing, a question you want to ask is, well, doesn't everybody do that special thing? Okay. And sometimes it turns out that, yes, everybody does that. Just not everybody claims they do the special thing in their advertising because it's just assumed everybody does. So these are 5 tactics that people use, that advertisers use. And like I said, we could do a whole marketing class on just different ways advertisers try to get you. But these are at least a good starting point to start looking for these kinds of practices. And so you become a better consumer and save yourself a lot of money and headache from bad purchases. Now let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about conspiracy theories. And the reason that actually conspiracy theories go with this, I think, is some conspiracy theories are about business, okay, and about what corporations do and what they don't do. And, there's all kinds of Monsanto conspiracy theories and conspiracies about the medical establishment and all that. But this is a good place to start talking about these because you've probably have heard different kinds of conspiracy theories. And in fact, here is a conspiracy theory flowchart, and I put this on the website too, or on the Moodle, so you can see. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and they're not all obviously going to be logically compatible with each other. But if you look at the conspiracy theory flowchart, you can always start with who's out to get us. Is it big pharma? Is it aliens? Is it them? And then who's them? Is it the government? Or is it somebody else? Is it a secret government? Or is it the US government? And you can just kind of look at the conspiracy theory flowchart here and just, figure out where you end up, if you believe any of these and how you end up there, and just all the things and people that are out to get us. And you can make a decision for yourself as to which ones you think are true, or maybe none of them are true. But yes, I will put that on the website for you to look at least for your entertainment. Some of these have bad language in it, so proceed with caution if you're going to look at it. But I mean, one of the reasons I'm showing you this is just the range of conspiracy theories that are out there. I mean, there's clearly ones about aliens, of course, and ones about ADHD being a fake illness, and Gerson therapy, and HIV/AIDS isn't a real disease. The JFK assassination, of course, is a famous conspiracy theory. Global warming conspiracy theorists. We never landed on the moon. The moon face on the rock, of course, the Illuminati. All these are different conspiracy theories that are out there that you can look at later. Now, what I want to do here is I just want to talk about conspiracy theories generically. And one of the first things we want to do is look at the 3 common rules in a conspiracy theory. So whenever you listen to a conspiracy theory, you're going to hear about three different rules. The first rule you're going to hear about is about the conspirators, right? And these are the people who have conspired, okay? So whether it's a government conspiracy, like the government killed JFK and here's how they covered it up, or it could be a corporate conspiracy, Monsanto is taking over the production of food and it's going to poison us all so we all die, and then I don't know who buys from Monsanto after that because everyone's dead, but whatever, that kind of thing. So the conspirators are usually an institution. It's rarely just people, but it's the people that have come together, the evil people who are coming together, banding together to work against us somehow. The aliens, the institution, whoever it is. Okay? So there's always the conspirators, and they're kind of the evil ones. But then in any conspiracy theory, you have the saviors. The saviors are the individuals who believe they've uncovered the conspiracy and want to expose it. Okay? So saviors are the people who have somehow accessed some information that is just not accessible to the general public. They had some source or there's some leak out there, and they've uncovered the truth. And so now what they want to do is they want to save humanity, or they want to expose what the conspiracy theories or conspirators are up to. And, of course, the conspirators aren't going to let them, right? They're going to hold them down, and, their conferences are going to get mysteriously canceled. And, there's just this, they're working against the man, right? And it just, everything's working against them, and nobody wants to hear it. And, they have to fight, right? They have to fight, the forces that are out there to get them. Now, the thing is, being a savior, it probably feels really good, right? You're a hero, you have information that not everyone has access to, and you know something special, and it sounds really good. But that's essentially what the people who have uncovered the conspiracy, that's kind of the role that they play. They're the savior. They're the ones trying to help you. They're trying to save you. You might know somebody, by the way, who's a conspiracy theorist. Maybe you are one yourself, and you kind of play on this role, and that's cool. So either way, there's the saviors. But then you have, in any conspiracy theory, the dupes. And these are people who are deemed blind or gullible or sheep by the saviors. And I have due to their skepticism, but that's not necessarily true, I guess, now that I think about it. These are just people who believe the mainstream idea, so the mainstream explanation. So if you believe that America landed on the moon and it was a real landing, then you're a dupe, right? You're being duped by the US government and all the propaganda and whatever from the media. And so just depending on your attitude, the saviors might save you and educate you and show how, you've been lied to your whole life, and your science teacher lied to you, and NASA lies to you, and everybody lies to you, but we know the truth, and so, they'll educate you. But if you're skeptical towards the theory, then they might consider you a dupe, and then they just kind of dismiss you, right? So if I were to argue against a conspiracy theory, they might say that I'm just naive, I'm a dupe, I just do what the government-controlled media tells me, I get paid by the government or by aliens or whatever the conspirator is. I wish that was true, by the way, but if you look at my bank accounts, definitely not true. but I wish. But so it's these kinds of issues where when you're trying to disprove or argue with the conspiracy theorists, this is what you're kind of up against. Okay, you're automatically labeled, and it's not a fun discussion. The interesting pattern here is in a conspiracy theory world, believing the mainstream is bad, right? So, like in science, you generally go with the consensus, right? Because multiple studies have been done, multiple people have looked at it, from different angles and from different theories, and we generally come to a consensus. Within conspiracy theories, it's the opposite, right? If you believe a mainstream idea, there's something wrong with you. So, interesting pattern to consider. Now, I'm trying not to go into one conspiracy theory in depth because there's so many of them, as you saw from the flow chart. So what I want to do here is I just want to talk about kind of the generic problems that any conspiracy theory will face. And then, but ultimately, you'll have to also look at the specific conspiracy theory to find the problems in it as well. But at least these 5 generic problems I'm going to give you are just ones that you should be able to consider across any of the conspiracy theories on the flowchart or other ones that you'll continue to hear in the future. One of the first problems with general conspiracy theories is that institutions are not people. So here's what we mean. A lot of times when you hear a conspiracy theory or something like it, they'll say something like the government is after us, or the media does this, or the big pharma will do this, the medical establishment will do this. And it talks about these institutions as if they're monolithic entities. When in fact, for example, within the government, there's several independent and competing institutions within the government, which makes it very hard to be monolithic and to act uniformly. So to kind of give you an example, if you look at federal bureaucracy today, I don't know, let me see if I can make this bigger. Here are all the institutions and government corporations and establishments that are in our federal government. Okay, you can see that there's a long list of different agencies and executive branches that are existing here. And part of the problem is that the government is so big, number one. There's 2.7 million employees that are working for the government today. And when the president takes over, so when Donald Trump took over office, he has to appoint about 3,000 appointees to help him run this government. So the government is so large and so complicated that our president has to hire, especially appoint, 3,000 people just to help him run it. Okay? So it's highly unlikely, if you look at the list of all the establishments and the different departments here, it's highly unlikely that one person is going to successfully control, even a few people are going to successfully control every little thing that the government is doing. And in fact, some of these departments work against each other. If you notice that whenever tax season comes and a new budget comes out, each of these departments have to compete with each other for funding, because the government only has a limited amount, and depending on who the president is, some departments get slashed. So automatically, some departments are going to compete against each other because they have to compete for funding. And then some departments have competing interests within each other. For example, the Department of, Department of Commerce and the Department or the Environmental Protection Agency. So I think that's part of the Department of Interior. Have to all work against each other. The EPA is down here. So, sometimes what's good for the Department of Commerce isn't necessarily good for the Environmental Protection Agency, so then they have to compete with each other. So the point is that our government is large, and there's a lot of competing interests within our government, and it's very hard for it to act monolithically. So it's not good to say the government is a person, right? So we say Uncle Sam is doing that, Uncle Sam is a figure, right? Uncle Sam is not a real person. The government is an institution of a vast size that it's not very easy to control it just with a single hand, okay? But that's also true of, say, the medical establishment. There's different companies and different researchers, and not all of them work with each other, and not all of them work against each other. So you have to look at the vast picture of things and not treat things like it's just a single entity and it doesn't have any competing interests or any self-checkings or any sense of independence from the different parts. Another problem with generic conspiracy theories is that falsification is often impossible. So remember, a good scientific claim should be falsifiable. There should be some way to disprove whatever theory or idea that you're putting out. But here's what ends up happening. Either number one, the conspiracy will co-opt all the countering evidence. So, for example, you might have somebody who's a vaccine denier, and you'll say, well, vaccines are good. Here's a study that shows that, when people have taken vaccines, the rates of contraction of certain diseases go down. Oh, but Big Pharma funded that study, so that doesn't count. Okay, well then let's look at the public health measures that have been done in different countries to show the decrease in, the rates of contracting of diseases. Oh, but the media is controlled by Big Pharma, and they paid them to make all those news releases and all that, so you can't use that. Okay, so the problem is, it's just that anytime you provide evidence, they'll just build the conspiracy theory to explain that evidence. So ultimately, you can't ever disprove it, because every little countering piece of evidence is automatically part of the conspiracy theory. Secondly, what they might do instead, because now some conspiracy theorists have recognized that, well, yeah, it's kind of hard to falsify our theory, and that's a bit of a problem. What some of them will do is say, actually, you can falsify our theory, but their demands for falsification are just impractical, if not impossible. So to disprove the Area 51, there were aliens that crashed in Area 51, and the government's been hiding aliens from everybody for the past couple decades. They might ask for the government to declassify a whole slew of documents. While the government could probably do that, to make the conspiracy theorists happy, but probably not. The problem is just that, it's not practical for them to do that, because there might be things in those documents that they don't want the world to know, because it's just military strategy to not let them know that, oh yeah, at Area 51, we actually test nuclear weapons, or we test these special, these special equipment, or these special weapons that we don't want everyone to have access to. So it's just not practical for an agency to meet their demands, because it would require too much sacrifice, or people would not understand it. But what also happens is sometimes the conspiracy theorists' demands do get met, but then it just leads to more conspiracy theories. An example, the birther controversy. So remember, people were saying Barack Obama was born in Kenya. If you could provide a birth certificate, then where is the birth certificate, right? There is no birth certificate. It's not out there. It doesn't exist. So Barack Obama provides the birth certificate, and then what ended up happening? Oh, the birth certificate was photoshopped. That's part of the conspiracy. So even though he acquiesced to the whole controversy, and he showed his birth certificate, it just created more conspiracy theories. Now it was photoshopped, or oh, he must have paid somebody to do this. And there are all these conspiracy theories about where the birth certificate came from. So at the end of the day, it's hard to win with conspiracy theorists, because when you provide evidence that's negative, either they co-opt it into the conspiracy theory, or their demands for falsification are impractical, or if not impossible, or when you do provide evidence, they then create new conspiracy theories around it. So it's just really hard to win when somebody is not willing to falsify their claims. And so it's often not in an institution's interest to try to dispel all the conspiracy theorists, because they're usually few, number one, but then number two, there's no win for them, because if they do it, then that just leads to more conspiracies. If they don't do it, people conspire anyways. So, doesn't matter. Let's not waste our time dealing with these people. A third problem with conspiracy theories is generally the bigger the scale, the less likely it's true. And that's just more or less a principle more than it is a problem. But if you think of Occam's razor, right? Think of all the people that would be necessary, all the premises that you would have to uphold for a certain large conspiracy theory to be true, right? So, if there's a secret society that's sort of running the world, and there's like a one world government, just think of all the people that would be necessary to make that happen, and all the premises that would have to be true, and all those people would have to keep it secret, and nobody's gonna let anyone know. It's just a bit difficult, right? If you think of Occam's razor, remember, the more assumptions that a theory has, the less likely it's going to be true. It's kind of true with conspiracy theories as well. So you just have to be skeptical the larger the conspiracy theory is. Another problem generically with conspiracy theories, depending on what it is the premise of self-interest is sticky. And here's what we mean. A lot of times conspiracy theorists or theories are based on the idea that somebody is out for power, or an institution is just out for money and they don't care about people at all. Something about this institution has some kind of self-interest that they're pursuing, and they just only care about that and nothing else. Okay? The example that I'd like to use, and you've probably have heard this before in probably advertising or listening to people, is the medical establishment. Okay, we'll just use that word. Does not want to find a cure for anything, right? Because it's in their interest to never find a cure for diseases or for cancer because they make money off the treatments. Okay, so you've probably have heard something like that before, and it's operating on the argument that the medical establishment is profit driven. A cure would hurt its profits, therefore the medical industry and all its researchers have no interest in finding a cure and are basically just kind of, I guess, twiddling their thumbs or just finding treatments but never cures for diseases on purpose. Okay? Now, there's a lot of problems with that argument, by the way, and if you just heard me kind of put out the premises, you can kind of already hear what the problems are. But the one problem I want to talk about for number 4 is just once again, the premise of self-interest, right? So that argument assumes that, once again, that all people who work in the medical industry are money-driven. But I would encourage you to talk to actual researchers like I have, because at Iowa, we actually have a cancer research institute, and I knew people who worked there. The problem is that researchers and even corporate executives and people who work in cancer research often are drawn to the field in the first place because they've been affected by cancer in some way. They had a friend that had cancer, or they had a relative who had cancer, or maybe they're afraid of cancer themselves because, cancer can affect anybody. It's not just it's anybody. Any position, cancer does not discriminate. So the argument that scientists are just so callous that they look around the world and they see, their parents dying of cancer, or they see cancer in their family or wherever, and they just don't care, right? They just like, no, I want to make money. I don't want to find a cure for anything. I just want to sit there and let people die. Nope, never going to find a cure. It's just a bit, I don't know. That's really, really negative, right? Of scientists, and just seems really unrealistic when you actually talk to people who go into the field and do all those years of school to find a cure for cancer. So it just relies on a very negative stereotype of scientists that I just don't think is true, right? And you have to remember, yes, money is a profit, and money is an important motivator in human life. But so is death. The fear of death is also a huge motivator for people. And everybody knows that you can get cancer someday. So don't you think that the industry and the researchers have that fear too, and they want to stop it before it happens to them? So it's that issue, right? You can kind of attribute a self-interest to people and just say they're about money, but I can also argue that it's also about fear of death. And in fact, they do want to find cures. And in fact, we have made progress against cancer on a lot of levels. So, there's other reasons to dismiss that argument, but I just want to highlight the self-interest one because hopefully this shows you that you just can't assume people have one single self-interest and then everything else is just to the side. You have to really just kind of know people and really know why people get into this field in the first place. Lastly, a generic conspiracy problem is, of course, evidence and sources. And this kind of ties back to last week's fake news kind of thing. Generally, when you ask people for evidence of their conspiracy theory, because remember, the burden of proof is on them. The burden of proof is not on you to prove that the mainstream is right. The burden of proof is on them to say this is actually the right theory. And when you start asking for evidence, that's usually weird things like leaks or photos. And remember, these things can be faked very easily. If you look at Area 51 photos, they're very inconsistent. When they show the alien body, there's one of the alien looking like this, and there's another one that's like that. And so which one is it? So you can tell that these things can be very easily faked and doctored. Or their sites are coming from, fake news sites, and it's just not reliable evidence. Or they'll say, oh, well, this ex-employee who used to work for the whatever industry or whatever government agency is coming out. Well, we can't have any way of confirming they work there. And so it's just, there's problems with the evidence and the sources as well. And so that's another thing you have to look at is when you're looking at conspiracy theories, what's the quality of the evidence that they're citing, right? And do we know that these are actual photos that we're looking at, or could they have been doctored or photoshopped, or is this photo actually from this, or is it from something years earlier that somebody is now just, photoshopping in? So These are the kinds of things you have to think about when you're dealing with conspiracy theories. But ultimately, critical thinking is the kryptonite to persuasion. If there's one thing that you can learn in this class, it's just that persuasion often relies upon your laziness in thinking and your unwillingness, or just, you just missing important cues. And we don't like to put a lot of time and energy in a lot of things that we don't have to. And that's understandable. There's a lot of ideas out there. There's tons of conspiracy theories out there that you could study and try to understand and all that stuff. But nobody really has time to study everything. But if you can at least learn criteria, right, and just kind of know like that, conspiracy theories, the bigger it is, probably less likely it is. Evidence is always going to be a problem. Falsification, a theory should be falsifiable. What are the standards for falsification of this theory? What is, when you say this, the government's controlling this, what's your evidence and what are your standards for falsification? What would it take to prove you wrong? If they can't say, here's what it would take to prove me wrong, if they can't give you clear criteria, or their criteria is impractical or impossible, then, there's not much you can really do. So, but hopefully this helps you in dealing with advertising as well. We now know some of the tactics that advertisers use, and I wish you good luck on your next assignments.